It all started with a simple bird feeder, a harmless, wooden contraption hanging from the oak tree in my front yard, swaying gently in the breeze. I loved watching the birds cardinals, blue jays, and finches flutter around, chirping their merry tunes. It was peaceful, harmless, until Karen got involved. Karen, the self-appointed dictator of our neighborhood HOA, had an uncanny ability to sniff out joy and snuff it out like a candle in a hurricane. So when she waddled up to my porch, clipboard in hand, I knew she wasn't here to wish me a good morning. "Excuse me," she said in her signature nasal tone, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "You're in violation of Section 4, subsection B of the HOA guidelines." I raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" She smirked, delighted to deliver bad news. "No exterior modifications that disrupt the neighborhood aesthetic." I glanced at the bird feeder. "It's a bird feeder, Karen, not a neon sign flashing free money." She sniffed. "Regardless, it's against the rules. You'll need to remove it immediately." I folded my arms. "And if I don't?" Her smirk grew wider. "A fine, of course." And sure enough, the next day, a $100 fine showed up in my mailbox. $100 for feeding birds. Now, any reasonable person would have sighed, removed the feeder, and moved on. But I am not a reasonable person when provoked. Karen wanted to wage war over a single bird feeder? Fine, I give her something worth fighting over. It was time to go big. If Karen thought a single bird feeder was a problem, she was about to have a meltdown. The very next weekend, I went all in. I didn't just add another bird feeder, I transformed my entire yard into a full-fledged bird sanctuary. First, I installed 10 bird feeders of various shapes and sizes, some hanging from trees, others mounted on poles, and a few even attached to my porch. Then came the bird baths, large, decorative fountains that gurgled with fresh water, making my front yard look like a mini paradise. But I wasn't done yet. I planted native flowers to attract hummingbirds and butterflies, set up wooden birdhouses along my fence, and even laid out a small feeding station stocked with seeds, suet, and mealworms. By the time I was finished, my yard had turned into a five-star resort for birds. And the birds came. Oh, did they come? Sparrows, robins, finches, doves, woodpeckers, birds I had never even seen before started showing up. The morning air was filled with chirping, and my once quiet yard had become a feathery festival of wings and song. And then Karen saw it. I was sitting on my porch, sipping my coffee, when I heard her signature screech from across the street. "What is this?" I turned, keeping my expression as innocent as possible. "Morning, Karen. Beautiful day, isn't it?" She stomped up my driveway, eyes darting between the dozens of birds hopping around. "What have you done?" "Oh, just enhancing the neighborhood aesthetic," I said, gesturing to the colorful flowers and charming birdhouses. "Nature is beautiful, don't you think?" Karen's face turned the shade of an overripe tomato. "This is excessive. This is chaos. The HOA will not allow." I cut her off, pulling out my phone. "Oh, actually, I checked. There are no specific HOA rules against having a wildlife-friendly yard. In fact, I swiped to a screenshot of local environmental laws. According to city ordinances, encouraging bird habitats is actually encouraged for ecological preservation." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But. "Oh, and I also reached out to a local conservation group," I added. "They loved my idea. So much so that they're officially recognizing my yard as a certified bird sanctuary." Karen looked like she might explode. You can't do that." "Oh, I already did." I held up a certificate that read, "Certified Wildlife Habitat Recognized by the State Conservation Society." Karen let out a strangled noise, then turned and stormed off. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't just mad, she was plotting. And that was fine, because so was I. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. No, she was the type to stew, scheme, and strike back when you least expected it. And sure enough, just a few days after my yard had officially been recognized as a bird sanctuary, I received another letter from the HOA. Violation notice. Due to excessive noise and environmental disturbances, your property is in violation of community peace ordinances. You must remove all bird-related structures immediately, or further fines will be imposed. I couldn't help but laugh. Karen had clearly twisted the rules in an attempt to shut me down. But if she thought I'd go down without a fight, she was sorely mistaken. Instead of taking anything down, I doubled down. I called up the local news. That's right, I reached out to the environment and wildlife segment of our community's news station and pitched a feel-good story. Local resident turns yard into bird sanctuary. HOA fights back. They ate it up. By the next day, a news crew was on my lawn, filming footage of chirping birds, fluttering wings, and even a rare woodpecker pecking happily away at a tree. They interviewed me about my efforts to support local wildlife, and I made sure to mention the HOA's absurd attempts to shut me down. Karen must have seen the cameras because she bolted out of her house faster than I'd ever seen her move. She tried to march onto my lawn to shut it down, but the moment she saw the microphones, she froze. "Oh, are you here to support our wonderful community?" the reporter asked, shoving a microphone in her face. Karen looked trapped. If she openly complained about birds on live television, she'd sound ridiculous. So she plastered on a fake smile and muttered, "Yes. We're always happy to see our neighborhood thriving." The second the cameras left, though, she turned to me with a look of pure hatred. "You think you're clever?" I sipped my coffee. "I know I am." Karen stormed off, but the damage was done. The story aired that night, and by the next morning, several local conservation groups had reached out to thank me for my efforts. One even sent me a donation to expand my bird sanctuary further. But the real icing on the cake? The birds themselves. See, Karen had spent all her time focused on getting rid of the feeders and birdhouses. What she hadn't accounted for was the natural consequences of having a massive, thriving bird population in the neighborhood. One morning, I stepped outside and nearly doubled over laughing. Karen's precious driveway, her pristine, spotless, obsessively power-washed driveway was covered in bird poop. Not just a few splatters. A biblical-level disaster. Seagulls had nothing on this mess. It was as if every bird in a 5-mile radius had collectively decided to use her property as their personal restroom. Karen came outside, took one look at the horror, and let out a scream so loud even the birds took flight. I leaned over my porch railing. "Yikes. You might want to invest in a power washer." Her eye twitched. "You did this on purpose." "Oh yeah, because I can totally control where birds relieve themselves." I grinned. "Maybe if you were a little nicer to them, they wouldn't target you." Karen turned red, then white, then some weird shade of purple. She spun on her heel and stomped back inside, probably to call another emergency HOA meeting. But at this point, it was me versus Karen. And I was winning. Karen was done playing around. The bird poop disaster had pushed her over the edge, and by the next HOA meeting, she was on a warpath. I didn't attend because I valued my sanity, but I had a neighbor on the inside, and she fed me all the juicy details. Karen stood at the front of the meeting room, red-faced and furious, waving around photos of her poop-stained driveway like they were crime scene evidence. "This is an attack," she shrieked. "A violation of our community standards. This menace has turned our peaceful neighborhood into a filthy, feathery nightmare." A few people mumbled in agreement. No one liked extra bird poop. But then Karen went too far. "I am proposing a neighborhood-wide ban on bird feeders, bird baths, birdhouses, and any activity that attracts birds. Effective immediately." Silence. Then someone hesitantly raised a hand. "Uh, how exactly do we stop birds from existing in the neighborhood?" Karen's eyes twitched. "We remove their food sources. We fine people for attracting them." Another neighbor frowned. Karen, I like watching the birds. So do my kids. Yeah, someone else chimed in. I have a feeder in my backyard. My grandmother loves it. I like the birds too, said another. Karen's face crumpled. She had expected outrage, support, anger. Instead, she was being outnumbered. That's when my inside source told me Karen made her fatal mistake. If you don't vote for this, she snapped, I will personally issue citations to anyone violating the new rule. And I don't care if it's your grandmother's feeder or your child's birdhouse. The room turned on her instantly. Because if there's one thing people hate, it's someone messing with their grandmothers. A murmur of protest grew into full-on opposition. You can't tell me what I can put in my own yard. My kids love watching the birds. You're being ridiculous. This is overstepping your authority, Karen. Karen panicked. I'm just trying to preserve the integrity of our community. But it was too late. The board voted against her proposal, 10-1. That one vote? Karen's. The cherry on top? The HOA president, who up until now had tolerated Karen's nonsense, finally had enough. You know what, Karen, he said, rubbing his temples. Since you love finding people so much, let's talk about your violations. Karen blinked. In my violations? He pulled out his clipboard. Unauthorized modifications to your home's exterior. You installed a security camera facing someone else's yard, which is a violation of privacy rules. And let's not forget, he flipped the page. Repeated harassment of homeowners. Karen's jaw dropped. You've been racking up complaints for months, he continued. And now, after this, consider yourself officially fined. Karen exploded. You can't find me. I'm on the HOA board. Not anymore, he said with a shrug. We're holding an emergency vote to remove you. Effective immediately. Karen let out a strangled noise like a dying goose and stormed out of the meeting. And me? Oh, I had no idea this was happening until my phone started blowing up with texts from neighbors. Karen was officially dethroned. I could have stopped there. I had one. The bird sanctuary was safe, and Karen had been taken down by her own stupidity. But no. I had one last move to play. With Karen officially booted from the HOA board, I could have sat back, enjoyed my victory, and let things settle. But where's the fun in that? I had one last surprise to ensure Karen's reign of terror ended in the most humiliating way possible. See, while Karen was busy waging war on birds, I had been busy with a little side project. I had reached out to the State Wildlife Conservation Office and, with their help, officially registered my property as a protected bird habitat. That meant my yard wasn't just a bird sanctuary anymore, it was now legally protected. Which meant Karen couldn't touch it. She couldn't find me. She couldn't complain. And if she so much as tried to mess with the birds, she'd be breaking state law. But the best part? I had a way to deliver this information in the most spectacular fashion possible. I planned a community event. With Karen's power crumbling, the neighborhood had started to turn against her. So when I invited everyone over for a neighborhood appreciation day, nearly everyone showed up. Even the local news station decided to cover it. And, of course, Karen couldn't resist. She lurked at the edge of the crowd, watching in horror as her former supporters happily enjoyed my yard laughing, eating, and watching the birds she had tried so hard to get rid of. Then, just as I was about to make my announcement, Karen snapped. She charged toward one of my bird feeders, grabbed it, and yanked it down in front of everyone. The crowd gasped. The local news cameras caught everything. I took my sweet time walking up to her, shaking my head. Tisk, TSK, Karen. She sneered. I don't care what the HOA says. This disgusting bird infestation needs to end. I smiled. Oh, you just made a huge mistake. I pulled out my phone and, in front of the entire crowd, called the State Wildlife Conservation Office. Hey, Yeah, this is the homeowner of the newly registered protected bird habitat on Lane. I'd like to report an individual for destroying wildlife resources. Karen's face drained of color. You're lying, she screeched. I turned the phone around, showing the official certification document. The HOA president stepped forward, smirking. You know, Karen, violating a protected habitat carries a fine of up to $5,000. The news reporter's eyes lit up. Did you say a fine? Can you confirm that? She shoved the microphone toward Karen's face. Karen started hyperventilating. I shrugged. Oh, I don't make the laws. But, hey, since you love handing out fines so much, I figured you'd enjoy getting one yourself. The crowd erupted in laughter. And Karen? She let out a blood-curdling scream, threw the bird feeder on the ground, and stormed off for good. After that, life in the neighborhood was peaceful. The birds continued to thrive, my sanctuary became a local treasure, and Karen? Well, rumor had it that she moved away, unable to face the humiliation. The HOA even abolished most of her ridiculous rules, and the community finally felt free. As for me, I sat on my porch every morning, sipping my coffee, watching the birds flutter about, and smiling. Because in the end, the birds won. And I got the sweetest revenge of all. Like and subscribe for more videos like this.